All right. So, welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. I am super excited to have Rachel Brady with me today. And Rachel is one of the first people that I followed on Instagram when I got sober. I honestly don't even remember how I found you. But she is an Instagrammer, TikToker, and blogger, and she just shares authentically about her mental health and fitness and sobriety journey. And she has a massive amount of followers, 33,000 on Instagram and 88,000 on TikTok, which is amazing. So hi,
It doesn't
Rachel.
even feel real. Whenever people say those numbers, I'm just like, oh my gosh, my mind can't even compute that amount of people.
Yeah, it's massive.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. It's a lovely day, so that's always nice. Thank you for the lovely introduction.
So why don't we start off, and you can just tell me a bit about you and like who you are, where you're from, and kind of your interests.
Yeah, so I am originally from California, born and raised. I lived there for about 20 something years. So I was definitely a Southern California girl, loved the beach, played volleyball, kind of the sunny lifestyle, which is really nice. And then I ended up moving to North Carolina, which is where I am right now. So a little bit of a culture shock, but I still really like it. And I am a person in recovery, obviously, first and foremost. But I have a lot of other hobbies, which I actually did find through recovery because it kind of gave me the space to explore what I actually liked. So I am a weightlifter. I actually got started into rock climbing this past year. So I've been really into that. And I love just hanging out with my husband, our little rescue dog, when times are appropriate, our friends, since we're still kind of managing COVID. But yeah, for the most part, that is kind of my very simple life, which I'm totally cool with because it wasn't always like that. So right now, simplicity is kind of still something to get used to, but I really enjoy it.
Cool. So tell me a bit more about kind of your drinking journey. Like when did you start drinking and what influenced your drinking?
Oh my gosh. So I actually like to kind of preface it by saying that I was really sheltered as a kid. So, like, all throughout middle school and high school, I really wasn't allowed to go out or party or anything like that. And funnily enough, we lived on a vineyard in Southern California. So I was surrounded by alcohol my whole life. So it really wasn't something that was kind of hidden from me. But at the same time, it was almost like this forbidden fruit. Like, I would be surrounded by it all the time, but I would never be allowed to drink. It was very strict. And at the same time, I was very much feeling like I was different from a lot of my peers. And whenever I saw them, socialize, and of course, when you're in high school, drinking seems like the only thing to fit in sometimes. So I saw alcohol as kind of like my golden ticket in. I was like, okay, well, as long as I'm able to drink and get drunk with these people, then of course, we're going to have to bond somehow, or they're going to think I'm cool enough to want to hang out with. Because that was kind of the thing I was lacking for a long time, was feeling like I belonged, and alcohol seemed to kind of be the answer for that. So I had my first drink probably when I was like 14 or something like that. But I didn't get drunk until my sophomore year of high school. And it was pretty like just extreme, where I just started drinking as much as I could because I didn't know when the next time I would be able to get drunk is. So I just thought, hey, I'm just going to drink as much as I can, as fast as I can. That way I can get as drunk as I can. So very much kind of already a red flag when it came to how I wanted to drink. And after that, I really didn't start drinking until college. I definitely kind of took the whole party scene and ran with it, especially because that was the first time I was away from my parents for a very prolonged amount of time. So I kind of still kind of fed into that idea of, if I have a social life that revolves around drinking, then I'm going to get invited to more parties. I'm going to meet more friends. I will be seen as attractive to guys, kind of that whole sort of party girl facade. I was so invested into making sure I was seen and that people liked me. Like, that was like, when you think about it, or when you first talk about it, it kind of sounds superficial, but it kind of, like I said before, stemmed from that feeling of just wanting to be belonged and accepted. So that is kind of how it started. And it's pretty normal, I guess, for, a woman in America, sort of, just to sort of start out in college or high school with experimenting. But for me, it escalated pretty quickly. So I would have a lot of red flags early on. Like I would always kind of get into trouble when I drank, and I always blamed it on bad luck. But I was definitely drinking way more than my peers were. So whenever, they would stop drinking for the night, I would keep going. Like I would do anything to try to keep the party going until, 4 a.m. And so it was very tough to discern where the line was in terms of my drinking as well, because binge drinking is so glorified in college. So there were so many times where I kind of had this gut feeling of like, I know that my drinking is kind of getting in the way of other things, but I would see all my other friends party the same way as I did, and they seemed to be living pretty, sustainable lives. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I just have to like learn how to balance it better or learn how to moderate better. But that was kind of the beginning of my drinking career, I guess you could say. And it was really interesting because most of my drinking happened in my early 20s, and I got sober at 25. So I kind of went through 8 or 9-ish years of just very intense, both drinking and interventions and trying to control it and the fallout. So even though it was kind of almost a decade, it seems like a lifetime ago.
How old are you now?
I am 28, so going to be 29 in September. So yeah, I know. Sometimes I even forget how old I am. I'm like, shoot, yeah, I'm still in my 20s.
Yeah, same. I'm 28 as well, at 92.
Yeah.
And I say that a lot, like back in my 20s when I drank in my 20s, and people are like,
yeah, right. You're like, you're still in your 20s, man.
And I totally get what you mean about the whole, like, is the same culture in Canada where I'm from of like university, glorified binge drinking, totally normal. And when I look back on it, it's just like bizarre how normalized that was. But when I was, in comparison to my friends, I didn't think that there was anything like different about me because everyone seemed to be doing it.
Absolutely. And a big thing too was in terms of the culture, I went to school in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, I mean, obviously, there are plenty of places like this too, but drinking was also so highly correlated with networking. So if you wanted to go to kind of like a place where a lot of people in your industry would be, there would more than likely be booze there. Or if you wanted to kind of upgrade your social scene or your social status, you would try to go into Hollywood clubs and get bottle service. Like there were all these different kind of status symbols that would revolve around alcohol, and it would kind of show like, hey, I made it because I got bottle service at this one place in Hollywood, or I was able to get into this exclusive bar in Venice Beach, stuff like that. And thankfully I kind of saw past a lot of the superficiality of it, but at the same time, when that is just marketed towards you again and again and again, like this is how you make it, this is how you make friends in Los Angeles, this is how you just do everything involving relationships, even dating. It was very tough to kind of remain true to my own integrity because everything around me was telling me like, this is the only way you can survive.
Yeah. It's like a massive part of like the North American, exactly what you said. Like it's just marketed to you as like, this is the way to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a huge thing, especially because I feel like for people in their 20s, obviously when you get sober, you do learn that there are other ways to socialize without alcohol, but it is so easy to not step outside that kind of boundary of, yeah, well, we go to the bar, we go to brunch, we, do XYZ, and this is how it is, and this is how it always was, and this is how it'll be. So it's really one of those things where if you decide to go alcohol free, you kind of snap out of this trance almost, and you look around, you're like, we can do other activities, right? And thankfully, it has allowed me to get way more creative in terms of, if I am hanging out with a friend for the first time, or if I'm trying to get to know someone better, I really have to be conscientious to be like, hey, like I'd be more than happy to meet up with drinks for you, but we could also do this instead or something like that. So it really has been a huge exercise in both learning how to make friends and how to sustain friends without alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about like how did your drinking, you kind of talked about how it started in college. How did it escalate over time?
It was such a slow burn. And I think that's one thing that sometimes people, if they aren't familiar with alcohol addiction or just problem drinking in general, sometimes they think like, oh, like you started drinking, with a lot of red flags and that's it, the end. But it can be a really slow burn. And I think that's why, so for some people, it is really tough to recognize if they even have a problem because it is so gradual. So like you almost don't even have a clear distinction of, oh, this is how I used to drink. And then you wake up one day, you're like, how did I even get here? Because it just happens so gradually over time. So for me, like I said, I started pretty recreationally, freshman year in college, trying to get drunk as many times as possible. And then it started to really, I always say that it was in three stages for me. So the first stage was drinking for recreation. The second stage was drinking to cope. So when I started to have, problems that either were the outcome of my drinking or just, regular early 20s problems, I would start drinking to cope with it. Like I had a really bad breakup that just tore me up and I would get drunk all the time and do the whole drunk crying thing because I didn't take time to process my emotions. I was in such denial and drinking was the only way my body would even like let those emotions out. So it looked like on the outside, it looked like I was just a crying drunk mess, but literally that was the only way I had allowed myself to even feel at that point. And so a lot of red flags started popping up again. I would start lying about how much I had to drink. I would start drinking in secret. So I would pregame the pregame essentially. I would become really irritated if I couldn't drink. I think that was a big one too, was if say it was a Friday night and a class was running late and I had to go to a party that night, I would get like straight up pissed off. Like, oh my gosh, can this hurry up so I can just start drinking now? So it was very like there were in hindsight, obviously hindsight's 2020, but there were a lot of things that I just kind of chalked up to just, wanting to de-stress and stuff like that. But a lot of it was pretty unhealthy for me. And then the last stage, when I knew, point blank that I had a problem, I call that the kind of drinking to survive, because by that point, a lot of really not so great things happened to me. And I was drinking by that point with trauma and it was just a whole mess. So I knew like in my gut, I had friends give me interventions. I had people straight up tell me that they were worried about me, but I could not stop drinking because it was so terrifying. The thought of getting sober and thinking like, what is going to be on the other side? And what am I going to have to face? Am I going to be the same person? Because it became so enmeshed with my identity. And yeah, it was just really one of those things where, if you look back, you can kind of pinpoint where things started to turning point. But now I'm just really grateful that I was able to get the help that I did need. I ended up going to treatment for a month. I had a very strong support system in my family and friends. So it was thankfully best case scenario. But yeah, in terms of how it escalated, it was a very slow burn.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people would, or like I relate to that of like, I think people think that, people just start out drinking and they're just like an alcoholic. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no one starts that way. Like everyone starts drinking normally. And then it progresses over time and it builds over time. And for some people it's at different rates or different speeds, or everyone kind of has a different journey with it. But you're absolutely right in that it's usually like a buildup.
Yeah, totally. And it depends on so many things as well. Like I said before, I was very fortunate that I was able to go to treatment and to be able to have resources like that, because even when I'm like, I will say, even when I was considering quitting drinking, there were not as many sober resources as they are now in terms of social media. Like I remember I literally Googled benefits of being sober one day after during a really bad hangover. I'm sure more than enough people have done that where they wake up and really bad hangover, like how to never drink again. And I remember Googling it and there were some articles, mostly like kind of science articles, but there really wasn't any online presence of sobriety and like firsthand experiences. So I think that was also kind of a huge roadblock for me, was I really didn't have anyone that I saw, that was like a millennial woman that was kind of a reformed party girl sort of thing. Like they were obviously out there, but I couldn't see anyone I saw myself in. So I think that was something really holding me back as well, just to be able to look at someone that I admired and say, hey, if they can do it, maybe I can do it too.
Yeah. And that's one of the most amazing things right now is I just feel like there's this big movement of like people coming out about their sober journeys on Instagram. Like, I don't think it was when I first quit, I could think of like the handful of people I found. And now it just feels like there's people popping up all the time, which is just so incredible. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Cause yeah, I've had my account since 2016. So 5 years, which is
Wow.
mind blowing to me as it is. But yeah, no, I remember like there were quite a few recovery accounts, but it wasn't as much as, I don't want to say the word mainstream, but it wasn't as socially acceptable, I guess you could say. Because I think for a lot of people, whenever, like even to this day, I have a lot of friends that whenever they think someone quits drinking, they automatically go like, oh, you were an alcoholic, or oh, you were forced to drink or forced to stop drinking. Like there's still a very narrow perspective of what it means to be sober or in recovery. So one thing I will say about social media, it has really expanded the narrative on, why people get sober, why they support people, how they support people who are in recovery, stuff like that. So yeah, no, even within the past like 5 years, it has absolutely blown up.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so tell me about your sober journey. Like, what was the catalyst for that, and how did you kind of move through it?
Oh my gosh. So I always like to say that my recovery date, my sobriety date are not the same, because like I said before, I knew that I had to get sober many times. Like rationally, I knew. But it was just one of those things where just you learn as you go. And so in January 2016, that is what I kind of call my surrender period, where I knew like, okay, I've tried to control drinking a billion times. Obviously, it's not working for me. Maybe sobriety is right for me. And I kind of had to just commit, I guess, to learning how to get sober. So for me, it wasn't even necessarily committing to be sober. It was just committing to learning and just giving it a shot. And then from January 2016 on, I started doing things bit by bit. I think the biggest mistake for me personally was just thinking that I ended up not drinking alcohol anymore. Because for me personally, there were a lot of underlying issues that I had to address. So getting sober was just the first step. It wasn't necessarily the all-encompassing solution. So I would kind of treat it like, okay, well, as long as I'm not drinking, then I'm fine. And I don't have to deal with anything else. But I learned the hard way that if you just focus on kind of white knuckling it and just not drinking, then you're still not addressing the things that made you drink in the first place. So for me personally, feeling isolated, feeling alone were huge triggers for me. So I ended up moving with my husband. I moved from California to Florida and pretty much had to uproot my whole life. And I felt so alone. I had to make friends from scratch. And by that point, all I knew how to make friends, or the only way I knew how to make friends was by drinking and going to bars and showing that I was like the fun, loud party friend. So it was really easy for me to kind of dip back into that because I didn't learn any other coping skills. So from Florida there, so we lived there for about a year. So I would be sober for a while, then relapse, be sober off from relapse, and it kind of wore me down. So by the time we got to North Carolina, where we are now, we got here in October 2017. And I don't want to say I lost hope, but I was very kind of cynical about recovery at that point, I think. I was very much like, I know recovery is best for me, but I can't even do that right. So I might as well just kind of go back to my old ways. And then I ended up having a pretty bad relapse session in October 2017 and ended up going to rehab. And I think that was the first time it really hit me how serious it was, because for a while I kind of treated like sobriety kind of like, yeah, that'd be really cool if I did this sort of thing. Like it's kind of like eating your veggies. Like technically you could not get away with not doing it, but in the long run, you do know what's best for you. I kind of treated it like that. And I think rehab and just being able to be around people that really got it and were in the same position as me, it really hit home like, wow, we obviously come from all these different lifestyles and paths, but there are so many things that only these specific groups of people, like they get it. And I think that's when I really kind of internalized that sobriety was the thing that was going to save my life, because I straight up almost died plenty of times. So after rehab, I just kind of went to that next level of taking it seriously and just really learned, okay, like I really need to address how to move forward in relationships. I need to learn how to deal with my people pleasing tendencies, because that was a huge thing in terms of drinking and people pleasing. And just all these things that didn't necessarily have to do with the tangible not drinking, but were building my sobriety resilience, I guess you could say. So yeah, my official sobriety date now is May 20th, 2018. So this May I'll be 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, so yeah, I always like to really hit home that my recovery started before my official sobriety date, because I do believe recovery is also trial and error. It's not just the, quote, things you get right. It's what you learn along the way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And, listening to that, it kind of clocked me into, I remember a period of my time where it would probably be my surrender time, but I was still drinking, but it was like probably the 4-month period where I kind of knew it was coming to an end, or I like knew that something had to give and I had to quit, but I've never titled it as such, but I like that, the surrender.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny too, because I feel like once you kind of become aware of how your drinking is affecting you, it's almost like drinking just isn't fun anymore. And that's the reason, a lot of us drink in the first place, is to have fun and to de-stress. But I'm pretty sure there's a quote, and I might totally butcher it, but it's like, it's time to let go when holding on is more painful. And that was definitely the case for me. Like at the very end of it, like even when I was I had my case of, I don't want to do, or I don't care, I just want to drink. Even the drinking in itself wasn't even fun. And that's why I always say, like, my last stage was just drinking to survive, because I wasn't drinking to have fun anymore. I wasn't drinking to socialize. I was drinking just purely out of pain. So yeah, the surrender period, I think, is extremely important to recognize and honor.
Yeah. So tell me, what was like the hardest part about achieving sobriety?
Oh man, I think the biggest thing was figuring out a way to have a social life, because that was my biggest, well, that was the reason I even started in the first place, was to feel loved and accepted. So I kind of had to figure out a way to still honor those desires without going back to the thing that had ironically isolated me. And I think that's always so funny is, this thing that I originally pursued to seek connection ended up being my worst isolator. So for me, that was my number one concern was, will I have a social life? Will my friends still love me? Will I still be invited places? Because I had plenty of times where I would say I'm not drinking, and I would still go out without a plan, and I would just be surrounded by all these drunk people and just be completely miserable. And all I would thinking is like, oh my gosh, I just want to drink and just be able to be on their level right now, or I just want to go home and cry in my pillow. So it was really important for me to find a way to set boundaries, be cool with leaving early if I need to, because I do love going out. And thankfully, I'm very fortunate to have friends that both do drink and they're also supportive of me. So they know like, hey, if you want to go out and you want to leave early, we can totally do that. So I'm very lucky with that. But yeah, the biggest hurdle I think with sobriety was also learning how to make friendships and learn how to be vulnerable and not worry about whether or not they were going to judge me for it. Because there were many times where I would try to explain my recovery or have people support my recovery, and we just didn't align. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It just wasn't in the cards. And that came from making a lot of friends based off drinking. You know what I mean? Like, I call them bar buddies, where you have a very surface level friendship. And if you decide to quit drinking, they may distance themselves. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just life. So yeah, to kind of sum it up, I think the biggest both hurdle and breakthrough for me was learning how to both make and be a friend in sobriety. So that's something I'm very passionate about talking about now, because I know that is a huge concern for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if, your adult life has been social life has been so oriented around alcohol. It's like, how do I do this? What do I do?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think like I said before, like once you're aware of that, you're just like, oh my gosh, everything is soaked in alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Okay. What are the best parts of being sober? What do you like the most?
Oh man. Well, for one thing, no hangovers is fantastic. I will never get sick of that.
Yeah.
Even like I remember there have been a few times, obviously within the past 3 years, that I've wanted to drink so badly like that. It doesn't just go away magically. But literally sometimes the only thing that keeps me from not drinking is just thinking of the hangover. Like my hangovers were so bad by the end of my drinking career, I would literally be in bed and for like the whole day and just sick to my stomach. Like I couldn't eat anything. It was awful. So like sometimes even just thinking about that has completely like cut my craving, like full stop. So definitely no hangovers is lovely. Being able to, like I said before, get creative with hobbies and just outings. So I started rock climbing in this past November. And a lot of my practice times are weekends, especially weekend mornings. So sometimes I'll be, climbing and I'll just think, oh my gosh, like if I were still drinking the way I was, I would not even make it to this gym. I would be still in damage control mode. I would still be waking up with an anxiety attack thinking about what I did the night before. So just having that moment of, wow, like I'm able to just move forward with my life and not have to worry about what I did the night before is so it will never get old for me, especially because my life was pretty much a whole cycle of damage control when I was drinking. Like I would promise myself to not drink as much. Obviously, once the first drink hits, it's all bets are off. I would maybe it would be a normal night. Maybe I would black out, just be a complete idiot of myself. And then I would wake up the next morning, probably have an anxiety attack, have to text people apologizing for how I acted, and then just go the whole week worrying about what people thought of me. And literally not drinking and just working on myself took all that out of the equation. And then you're left with all this free time and you're just like, oh, like I can actually pursue things that make me happy. Go figure. So that's also really lovely. And then I think another thing, and this is actually something that I didn't really lean into until this past year. And that is just being okay with simplicity. Especially during a pandemic, I think a lot of people were forced to slow down. And I think a lot of people understood that, hey, being available all the time and, being on our phones all the time and all this stuff, yeah, it can be distracting and it can be a good escape. But sometimes, being busy doesn't equal being happy. And I think sobriety has really allowed me to just look at things face value and be able to be cool with the present, because mindfulness is something that I'm still working on actively. I mean, as someone who practices yoga, I'm sure you know all about mindfulness and how tough it can be sometimes. So that is something that I'm like to this day still actively working on.
Yeah. And sobriety kind of gives you I don't know, like for me, I practiced yoga while I was drinking and I look back and I'm just like, I don't know how I did that. Like being hungover in classes. I don't think I was ever properly meditating, like, because I always had alcohol in my body and, the hangovers and the anxiety and all that jazz. And so obviously it takes like lots and lots of practice and I'm not perfect at it, but I feel like with the alcohol gone, it's like you can finally actually just like lean into the present.
Absolutely. And yeah, like there's There's something to be said about, fitness, and just mindfulness and being able to just really be in tune with your body. Because I was the same way. Like I was a huge fitness person while drinking, and it was such a cognitive dissonance moment because I would love lifting, I would love getting strong, I would love seeing what my body could do, but I would be lifting in the morning and then just completely destroying my body with alcohol the night of. And for a while, I could work out hungover, but after a few years, working out hungover was impossible for me. So then I miss workouts, and then I'd be mad at myself because I would literally see firsthand like alcohol is taking away this thing I love so much. So yeah, I remember actually when I took your class, you said something about like clarity and contrast, and just how yeah. I know. I remember that. No, and it really stuck.
I
No,
say that all the time.
yeah, and it stuck with me because it's so true where like you really don't sometimes have those aha moments unless you've kind of experienced the polar opposite. And even if like say you've been doing yoga or weightlifting or whatever, like the whole time, you see so differently how much you can actually get out of it once you've seen what you don't want it to be like.
Wow. Absolutely. Yeah. Clarity and contrast. It's like, I never will forget like there was the first morning when I like got through the withdrawals, and I remember like going to work, and I don't remember like where along it was, maybe 2 weeks into it, but I just remember like driving to work and being like, this is what it feels like to not be hungover at like 6 a.m. And it was like the most beautiful thing I'd ever felt.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Like people always make fun of people saying like, did you never shut about not being hungover? I'm like, yeah, because it's fantastic, especially after you spent like a decade, kind of going through mini withdrawals. Like thankfully I'm very, very fortunate that I didn't have like severe withdrawals, but like I would straight up shake when I was hungover. Like I would have the shakes so bad. And there were so many times where I literally felt like I was dying. Like you feel like your body is a sponge and it's just been wringed out. So yeah, no, the whole clarity and contrast concept is just, it's unexplainable to other people sometimes, but it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So tell me a bit about how did you get into blogging and TikToking and Instagramming and like this whole persona or like presence on the internet? How did that come about?
Oh my gosh. So it has been I don't even know how to describe it because I always like to say, so for my Shotstoshakes Instagram, I started that originally as a fitness account because like I said, I was super into fitness. So originally I just kind of used it. I started a year after I graduated from college. And it was just kind of my little, space on the internet to post my gym selfies and whatever I was thinking, just kind of like a little diary, if you will. And by this point, I was about 4 months into my recovery journey. And I talked about it here and there, but not necessarily wanting to be a recovery account. But I was like, hey, if this is something that's going on, I might as well, talk about it. And I'll throw in if I'm working out, if I post something about a workout, I'll say, yeah, I'm super happy. I'm not hungover. And I would start using all these hashtags that had to do with sobriety. And it would kind of just ping me to all these different accounts. And that's when I started to notice that there were sobriety accounts. And this was the first time I ever saw anything like that. I'm just like, oh, people are, documenting their journey. Because, I mean, it made sense to me because people document their fitness journey. Why wouldn't they document their recovery journey? Because they're both deeply personal and people can find inspiration from it. So I started talking about it more and more. And honestly, it was just kind of this organic growth where, I would talk about what I was going through. And I didn't necessarily have a before and after at that point. I don't think I ever really will have a true before after. But I was just kind of talking about what I was going through, and that attracted people. And it was just kind of that ebb and flow of both learning from and talking about what I learned. So it sort of turned into this recovery account, I guess. And then in terms of blogging and TikToking and all that, I've always found writing to be super cleansing and super healing for me because honestly, like sometimes I don't have the words verbally to talk about stuff. Like I went to speech therapy when I was little. So sometimes talking and just expressing how I feel via my mouth is really tough. But when it comes to writing, it just feels completely effortless. Like I can put all my thoughts so consistently and concisely on paper or screen, I guess you could say. So it just totally made sense that I would, kind of document my recovery through writing. And it was also a really good way for me to sort of look back and be like, hey, this is what I learned. This, if, I was in a pretty bad headspace, I could look back and be like, okay, well, this is what I was writing. So this is like what was going through my mind. And then in terms of just turning what it is then into what it is now, it was honestly just taking what people had taught me and amplifying it, and just being able to just embrace all the parts of recovery, because I feel like sometimes it's really easy to post the highlights of it, like, hey, this is my sobriety milestone, this is, me not being hungover on a Sunday morning, which is all great. But there are so many different parts of it. You have the resentment of recovery, you have the pink cloud, you have, being angry at your past self, like all these different aspects that I think a lot of people experience, but we don't really talk about. And so that was really a huge part of just being able to write freely. And with my TikTok, that's kind of more the humor part of it, where I like to just kind of laugh at the silly things I did, laugh at the kind of mindsets that we think are totally rational, but then we talk to our therapist, we're like, oh, definitely not rational. So that was kind of the humor in it, because I always say, like, if you can't laugh at yourself, what's the point? But yeah, in terms of that, it has been such an integral part of my recovery, just because it both gives me a channel to express myself, and it allows me to find other people in recovery that I align with.
Yeah. Oh my God, your TikToks are hilarious.
Thank you.
So I'm relatively new to TikTok. I just joined like maybe 3 months ago. But I have been following you on Instagram since like the very early days. And I love that the TikTok is kind of like, it is like a different side of things.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it's one of those things where like, yeah, you can only put so many things into writing. And I think, recovery and humor are so closely intertwined, especially for people that have been through so much. And just to be able to like look back and find the humor in things is so important, because, it can't be doom and gloom all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to bring like, I think also bringing just like light and joy to it is inspiring for people in dark places as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, it's definitely not to say that it's, sunshine and rainbows all the time, but like sometimes you just have no choice but to laugh at yourself.
Yeah. Or you cry.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can do both, whatever.
So if someone wants to get sober, what advice would you give to them?
Oh man. I think the two biggest things I would say is, number one, tell someone. Obviously it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to go into full detail, like your full story, but just have someone that can help you hold you accountable. And this can be someone you trust. It can be if you're in 12 step, it could be a sponsor, it could be a therapist. It can be someone that just, they don't necessarily have to get it, but just to be able to speak it out loud, I think is so important, because I don't know about you, but for me, if I was able to keep it in, I was able to justify it that much more, because I had that thing of, well, no one knows about it. So, what's the point? So, if I lied and said, oh yeah, like I'm totally sober, knowing damn well that I didn't tell anyone that I was having cravings or triggers or anything like that, then it was really easy for me to be like, oh yeah, like I'm fine, even though I was definitely not. So I think the biggest thing or one of two things, is to tell someone. And then the second thing is to dive into recovery resources. And this can be, whatever, like depending on if you are sober curious, if you are in active addiction, because there obviously are different ways to get sober, and there are different ways to why you're getting sober. But there are podcasts, there are books, there are videos, there's so much available at our fingertips now. And we're living in an age where it is so, it's definitely not easy. I never want to say it's easy, but it's way more accessible than it used to be. I think that's the right term. So yeah, even if you aren't, quote, ready to get sober, I feel like listening to people's stories and listening to how they did it and what hesitations they had, I think it's really powerful, because it allows you to really take a step back and say, okay, like, what did I identify with that person's story, and how can I apply what they did to my life? So I think those are the two biggest things that I would say in terms of advice, is to tell someone, to find a way to have accountability, and to dive into recovery resources.
Awesome. Yeah, those are great suggestions.
Thanks.
And I totally agree with you on both points, about like building your community, both, finding someone you can share with, and then also just like learning from others. I know that was a turning point for me, in my surrender phase. I was starting to get targeted ads,
Oh my gosh.
about quitting alcohol, probably because I was up at
No
night.
way.
Yeah, I think I was up at night Googling like how to quit drinking. And then I was
Yeah.
getting targeted ads for 1 year, no beer. And they were people's stories. And that was like that was the nugget. And then I didn't want to like the page because I was like, I don't want anyone to know, but I would just go to the page and read people's posts. And that was huge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so funny how, it can have such a domino effect, because I was the same way. I forgot the website. It was, it was definitely not like a full-on recovery website. I think it was the same thing as 1 year no beer, where it's just like, hey, I went alcohol free. That's what happened. But I just poured through that, and there were so many things where I was just like, wow, you can do that. Like, just so many benefits of going alcohol free that I didn't even think about. And yeah, it really planted a seed. So even if you're not ready, just being able to consume that and just have that exposure to life without alcohol, because like we said before, so alcohol is so normalized. So whenever we read something about, going against the norm, we're just like, oh, you can do that. It's like, no one's stopping me from doing this. This is wow. Yeah, no, it's so fun to read stories and just see how people did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Can we play a quick round of either or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I'll try to come up with some fun ones.
Okay.
Okay. NSYNC or Backstreet Boys?
Oh God. I'm going to say Backstreet Boys.
Me too. I saw them in Dubai. They're amazing.
What? I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
I know everyone was, I was in sync, but Backstreet Boys were my original favorite.
Yeah. Good choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Backstreet Boys or Spice Girls?
Honestly, I never listened to Spice Girls.
What?
I know. I always tell people, they're like, no way. I'm like, I don't know. I was team Backstreet Boys apparently.
Good team to be on.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go with more 90s artists.
Okay.
Britney Spears or Christina Aguilera?
Oh, I'm going to have to say Britney, man.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, free Britney.
Yes. Oh, I need to watch that. Have you seen that?
It's really good. It's really good.
Put it on my list.
Yes.
Okay. Swaying from the music. Love Actually or The Notebook?
Ooh. I'm going to go with The Notebook, because I have a funny memory of, I was in college and I was studying, and like, I was in my zone. I had my headphones in, and I didn't realize my roommates were watching The Notebook outside. And I walked out to like get something and ask them a question, and it's right in the middle of this, like the ending, and they're all just sobbing. And I'm just like, I'll just leave you alone. So I love that memory. So I'm going to say The Notebook.
Good choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Oh, I'm going to say coffee. I do enjoy a good cup of tea, but my caffeine tolerance is so high, so I'm going to have to go with coffee.
Yeah. I love coffee too. Okay. Mountains, snowy mountain or ocean beach?
Ocean Beach. I'm California all the way, man.
Yes. I like your
Yes, I do love the mountains. I will say they're lovely, but the ocean's always going to have my heart, as cheesy as that sounds.
Yes, I'm 100% the same. Cool. Well, thank you so much for this episode. This was awesome.
Yeah.
I will post in the episode description, like your information, your Instagram, your TikTok and everything. So my listeners can find you.
Awesome.
And and I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.